Well, being last but not least, I get to talk about my favorite subject, and that really isn't the silver market. My mission statement is to teach and empower people the benefits of an honest financial system. We are standing, in my view, at a unique point in history on a global basis. If I could give you one economic surety, one absolute, one guarantee, everyone in this room would be interested in it. Some would take action on it. If I could give you a stock or a commodity or an option or some financial instrument and guarantee which direction it would move, some of you would take action, some of you just listen. But I cannot do that. But I can rely on 5,000 years of recorded history, and I can let you know what you already know. That there's never been, in recorded history, a fiat currency that has not failed. And that is the main fact of what my life's work is about. Silver and gold, of course, are extremely important to that. But as some of my colleagues have alluded to, it's basically a holding mechanism to hold value. So hopefully when we come out the other side, we have wealth intact in order to build a better world for the future. Ned, I have to thank you and everyone associated with this conference for inviting me. I also want to thank all of you in the audience, because regardless of how rich or poor any of us are, not only in monetary terms, but intellectual property or physically or spiritually, it really doesn't matter. There's only one commodity that I know of that we all get equally, and yet some of us don't really cherish it enough. And the older I get, the more I do, and that is time. So thank you for giving me your time. And with that, I'll try not to bore you. Okay, I wrote as most of you know, I write a report called the Morgan Report. It's focused mostly on the macroeconomic picture, the precious metals, and the mining companies. And after the first decade of my work, I was rather pleased with what silver had done, but I thought really what I owe to my readers and myself in a way is, okay, well, what's silver going to do over the next 10 years? So as difficult as this was, I acted as if I didn't know anything about the silver market. I started with a blank piece of paper and asking the question, what is silver and where does it placed on the periodic table? I'm sorry, my sick sense of humor, but I really did start with that premise. And at the end of that study, I wrote the March edition of my report, which I've subsequently put out parts of it onto the internet. As we can see, obviously, we've had quite a run in silver. Silver has very much a characteristic of the spike highs and spike lows, and we are, in my view, at a spike high temporarily. As far as what is the monetary price going to be on silver eventually, you tell me when the Fed's going to quit printing and I'll give you a price. I've said $100, but it's not the price I want you to focus on. It's what's going on behind the scenes, and everybody here has explained that as well as myself. Don't want to belabor the point. I do have a website. I do consultations across the board. I speak around the world. For anybody that's interested in delving into the topic deeply, the site menu here, there's a ton of articles I've written over the last 10 years on the topic that are for free. You can get on the free mailing list. I have to point out for Chris Powell, my GATA poster here, since he's fallen asleep in the front row. It's okay, Chris, it's a long flight, I know. But for anyone that's interested, if I ever do get short on cash, I have number 249, and I figure that that's worth more, not only because I own it, excuse my ego, but since the number 49 appears in it. I was born in San Francisco, and they're famous for the 49 gold rush, so I kind of like having that number. And that's not what I planned on talking about, but let's move on. Okay, silver's use continues to increase. There are so many that I could take hours to go through them all. But medical applications continue to increase. And ridiculous as it sounds, toothbrushes are being embedded with nano silver because it's a natural biocide, and of course you don't have to worry about bacteria in your toothbrush, okay? All kinds of stuff. Wound dressings are huge. Coatings in hospitals. It just goes on and on and on and on. That's just the medical field. Electronics, we're pretty much familiar with all of, many of them. Batteries, clothing. A lot of people don't know that polyester is actually a catalytic process using silver to make polyester. Home appliances, you're seeing this more and more in your high-end washers and your refrigerators, and actually high-end homes are having impregnated silver surfaces in the cooking areas so that you don't really even need a cutting board per se. You can just throw it on your surface and it's got the biocidal properties of silver. Solar power is solar panels primarily, but there's also these concentration mirrors that are used to make electricity the old-fashioned way. You just focus the light on a collector that creates steam, and that pushes a steam turbine, which has been around for decades. Gold or silver? Of course, I get this question quite often, and I'm sure I'll probably get some if I have time today. The answer is yes. Everyone wants to overanalyze things. My friend, Mr. Turk, I think he did it so well, Look, don't think. Look at that chart. What do they look like? They look pretty close to the same darn chart through inflation and deflation. My analogy for where we are, because there are pressures on both sides, but if you took a paper clip, everyone in the UK knows what a paper clip is, right? And you unfold it, and you move it up, and you move it down. Eventually, it's going to break. And that's sort of like inflationary pressure, deflationary pressure, inflationary pressure, deflationary. And we're going up and down through this segment of time that I put on here. And they pretty much have tracked each other during those cycles. So, inflation it's only gold in inflation. No. Well, it's only this in deflation. They're 85% correlated. You should have both. I'm not a silver-only guy. There's a lot of gold concentrics or centric people that gold only. I won't argue with them. I present my case. Supply and demand. Since 1990 through 2006 inclusive, 16 consecutive years, the above-ground silver supply was eaten away by roughly 1.5 billion ounces. I'll round it up to 1.6. No one knows the exact number, which turns out to be 100,000 ounces on an annual basis. Due to the increased commodity boom starting roughly the same time frame, the increased mining activity roughly reached balance around 2006, 2007, depending on which study you look at. I look at both studies, those from GFMS here in the UK, and I also look at the CPM group out of New York, New York. Regardless, both of them agree basically that we hit equilibrium or a slight surplus starting around 2006, 2007. And then we had the financial crisis where the industrial demand for silver fell off sharply, and of course it's rising again quite rapidly. So this delta, or this difference between these two curves, is a deficit, not a shortage. And the way supply and demand meet, and they must meet, supply equals demand always and everywhere, is that the above-ground stockpile, again, was eaten down by about 1.5 billion ounces. So I often get the question, what do you think the price of silver will be this time around at the top? Does anyone know the answer? Because I don't either, right? Do I really know what the total top paper price of silver is going to be? No, I don't. But I know this. It did hit $50 the ounce in 1980 when there were 2 billion ounces of silver above ground, and now there's roughly 500 million to 700 million. I do know this, that two guys from Texas and a few Arabs were buying up a lot of silver, and it went to $50 an ounce. And now that was a U.S.-only phenomena, counting a little bit of the Middle East. Now it's a worldwide phenomena. Russia wasn't buying silver in those days. They are now. The Chinese didn't know what the silver market was from the banking system. They could go in and buy silver over the counter in China now. It's a worldwide global phenomenon, and people are catching on to the silver story. And yes, it's still early, but it's not a U.S. phenomenon, it's a global one. What's the money supply done since 1980? What's the confidence in the system since 1980? So if we have roughly 25% of the same of silver that we had in 1980, huge increases in the distortions in the global economy, a worldwide market this time around, where do you think the price is going to go? I think it's going higher. Silver mining, okay? Now, when I did this study, I used some work, and I give credit almost always for anyone's work that I use. I just feel that's the only ethical thing to do. You hear some silver commentators / analysts, and they are, well, I said it. Well, I say a lot of things too. They're not always factual, but if they aren't, I try to let you know it's my opinion. Factually speaking, we had this big boom in mining from roughly 2000, and we were actually compounding the rate of silver production by about 2.5%, 3% per year over the last decade. And that helped to make up some of the deficit, as I explained earlier. So that's the production side. And I'm going to come back to this. I just want to show the curve. It's not a good one, but at least you get the idea. So I looked at the mining growth in this 10-year study. And so I made an assumption. And I said, we're going to continue at a 2 to 3% per year, question mark, will we be able to continue over the next decade? And the reason I have the question mark here is that means we have to compound at 3%, which is roughly 20 million ounces a year, year after year after year after year, go 10 years. Now, 20 million ounces may not seem like a lot to you, but it's a lot in the mining world. Pascalama is Barrick's big producer, is going to produce roughly 20 million ounces a year. It took a long time to get that mine into full production. So what I'm saying is you have to discover, implement, and mine. In other words, get out of the ground a new Pascalama every year over the next decade just to meet the same amount of mining increase that we saw the last 10 years. And I'm assuming that can be done, but I don't believe it. That's my assumption. So I'm being very conservative. I'm saying that this massive increase in silver mining can continue and continue and continue and continue. So what will that do? Well, that'll give us 800 million versus the 650 that we currently have. But yet we have an increase in demand that exceeds that increase of mining based on those rather favorable assumptions.